Hello, everybody. I have got the LIBROtarian on the other end of the line. How is it going, man?
It is going good, man. I've had some beers and I am having a good evening so far.
That's good to hear. So I don't know if people remember from last time, but you live in Oklahoma, right? Whereabouts
Yes.
in Oklahoma?
Right smack in the middle in the city. If you're from Oklahoma, when somebody says the city, you know it's Oklahoma City.
There you
go. Right there in the middle, man.
I have been there once, or actually I've driven through a couple times, but once I stopped there, I went to the memorial for the Oklahoma City bombing that took place there. And it was actually 2015, so it was the 20th anniversary. So there were lots of flowers all over the chairs and everything. It was interesting, but
yeah, it's a really nice memorial. My cousin actually worked for the Park Service and worked there for a few years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So in light of my recent videos, I've talked about moving away from politics a little bit, but we're gonna start there and then move away as the video goes on. So I just wanted to get your reaction to the disaster of an election that we just had. Have you been taking it in stride, or has it been hilarious, or has it been stressful, or what is your overall opinion of this? Sorry about that. That was we had a little back feed there, but
talk about an echo chamber,
man. Echo chamber, yeah. So what's your reaction to it been?
I was prepared for. I would say I'm not in any sort of panic. It is entertaining. It's sad. It's like a dark comedy. You know, it's sad. It's kind of like, oh man, I wish this wasn't real. But it's kind of funny seeing people like put so much stock into this, and like we've talked about before, and it's really not going to change a whole lot. like it's the same system. It's like you said in one of your videos. The system's the problem. The people work in the system and exploit the system, and the system is where the issue is. Change the people. If the system stays the same, the people aren't going to matter too terribly much. So, am I panicking? No. Probably the only thing that I'm a little saddened by is that I'm an optimist, for the most part. And so I was a little more optimistic about how well Joe was going to do. I mean, obviously she's not as dynamic of a candidate, but we've talked about that before. She's a little less fiery and attention grabbing than I would like, but I was still hoping for the best. She did, vote count wise, popular vote wise, she did a second best as any other libertarian has done, but the 1.2%, I'll say that's probably the only disappointment that I had overall. But otherwise, it was the shit show I expected.
Yeah. So, what do you think about losing Trump and getting Biden as far as the advancement of liberty goes? Because honestly, Joe Biden at his core is probably a little bit less liberty oriented than Trump. But do you think the new dynamic will force certain people in the government to suddenly grab the banner of liberty again, even though they've dropped it under Trump because their morals and their standards have kind of gone out the window over the last 4 years?
Oh yeah, I definitely think the theatrics of opposing the opposition is going to take hold again, and you're going to see a lot of traditional conservative values being espoused a whole lot more, and the red side getting really up in arms about, classical conservatism and how we need to, maintain the integrity of this and that and blah, blah, blah. And it's going to stalemate. It's going to stalemate everything. And that's the most you can hope for in a corrupt system, is that things kind of stalemate,
Right. Yeah. So what I have been trying to tell people who I know, and then I've also been saying this in my recent videos, is forget who the president is, forget who your governor is. Like, the solutions are not going to come from the government. That's where literally all the problems, at least this year, have been coming from. I can't think of too many problems that weren't made worse or started by the government this year. And I can't think of too many solutions that were presented by the government and not by people helping each other and by, private companies finding, being able to make masks at quicker rates or being able to create better testing kits. The government has just slowed everything down and made it worse. So stop hoping for this euphoria where you get some president who's like Mr. Potato Man that has all the pieces of every ideology put together that's going to make everyone happy and is going to unite the country and bring about a government of, by, and for the people that, shall not perish from the earth. It's fantasy. Like, just take care of each other, do what you're good at, and, be independent, because these times call for that type of attitude.
Yeah, and I like what you said in one of your videos is about mutual aid. And I think that's something that we can, despite the ridiculous, empty platitude of uniting America that Biden's pushing forward now, in all honesty, we need to unite as people in terms of hey, stop relying on the government. Stop looking to Big Brother or, whatever you want to call it, to be your resource for anything, for self-worth, for your skill set, for your livelihood, for your emergency situation, your emergency bailout in big and small ways, like mutual aid and building community. And I hate saying it because it's just not a buzzword of building unity. Just be human, be a person to somebody, be somebody that people know they can rely on when things go bad. I love your idea or your story of, you didn't have a job, but you lived with your aunt and uncle for a while and helped work on their house, and they paid you some, but you also didn't have to pay for, somewhere to live.
Right.
And I can see that being something that I know some of my friends would do for me and I for them if they got in a situation where they had to. It's something that needs to be kind of a central consideration, at least, not something that everybody has to do, but being open to that idea of helping your fellow person and not saying that government needs to inject a stimulus in terms of morality or any other sort of thing. It should be you. I'm going to use another cliche saying, be the change that you want to see. Don't wait on something else to happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was what our downfall was in response to this pandemic, because I saw complete selfishness just take to the streets back in March when this thing first hit. I saw shopping carts overflowing with toilet paper and canned goods. Oh, yeah. And I was just like, what are you guys doing? It's not like the bubonic plague just hit us. And at that time, to be fair, we didn't know as much about it as we do now, but people were just losing their minds, and there was no consideration for older people. There was no consideration for people who can only shop when their paycheck comes in. There were people who were plenty well off in normal times, and they were just going in there and cleaning the shelves and just taking everything for themselves. And I don't think that would have been the response 50 years ago. I might be wrong, but I think people would have kept their heads together a little bit better. They would have kept their cool. They probably would have taken better care of each other. You look at things like World War II and how people came together to support that effort. I realize there were government mandates too, but there was a will of the people behind that. There's no will of the people behind anything that's going on right now. There's there's no unity. There's no willingness to give up things that we're used to doing. I feel like if people were being smart, we wouldn't have anything to worry about. Like if we were, if you don't go over to your grandmother's house, if you don't go to a rock concert, like there were things that people could have been sensible about throughout this. And we've just chosen not to be. We've chosen to be selfish. And a lot of people think that having the government mandate more things and run more things is going to fix that problem, where I think that's what's kind of led us to be that way, because we're not used to being independent. We're not used to watching out for our neighbors. We're getting more and more used to relying on the government to fix all of our problems. And I think that's wrong. I mean, because the buck stops with you. It's up to you to take care of yourself and your family and your friends, and stop shirking that responsibility. That in my mind was what left us with our fly down when the coronavirus hit. That was my observation. I don't know if you felt that way.
Yeah, it's what's the word? It's the individualism.
Yes.
That people like criticize Americans for in general is like just our individualism instead of our collectivism.
Right.
Which now it sounds like I'm talking like socialistically, but but I mean that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying it like there's a selfishness. There's an abandonment of consideration for others that narrows the scope of like if you want to go back to the nap, like my principles in general are any actions that I take in any sort of way should only have, if it has any effect on anybody else, it should only be positive.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I should be inactive. My principles rely on taking action, and those actions being intentional to either help or neutrally affect people. And I think that's something that is so easy for people to just want to rely on somebody else to not take that sort of responsibility. And I honestly think me and you line up on this because we grew up in such conservative, households. Like you said, we both grew up in Republican households and with traditional Christian values, and I think some of that bleeds over into this in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think individualism is always cast as selfishness, where to me, it doesn't, that's not what that means. I mean, it really depends on the individual. But individualism to me tells me that it is my responsibility to do what's right. It's my responsibility to take care of my family, my neighbor, anybody, the guy on the side of the street who needs a lift, the guy who, the other week I was in Colorado in my personal vehicle, and there was a guy who had a sign that said, I need a new new alternator. So I stopped and I bought him a new alternator. I just went he told me what type he needed. We took it out of his car so I could take it to the auto parts store, and I got him one. And, that's individualism. That is taking it upon yourself to take care of your neighbor. And this idea that we're just going to push it up to the next level. No, we should have some program that takes care of that guy. Why? Because once you have a program taking care of somebody, there goes the consistency and the accountability and the transparency, because I know exactly what that guy needs, and I can go help him get what he needs and get him on his way. I made loans to some people in my family and to some friends who needed help, and I knew exactly how much money they needed. We made a deal between us. I'm not making any money off of it. I'm just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And there's no waste, there's no fraud, there's no need to pay anyone for overhead costs or, to audit this program to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just people taking care of each other. And actually, you know who talked about this a lot this year was Vermin Supreme, believe it or not. I don't know if you... He was right on with this.
he definitely, like, I said it back when they were doing the presidential debates, his satire is genius, and he has a message in it, and that's what makes it so genius. And I think as an activist and stuff, he's amazing. He's entertaining. He's like, he knows how to make his absurdity relevant. You know, he really does an amazing job. Like, he's an amazing, like, activist, performance artist, whatever he decides to categorize himself as that day.
Right.
But as you were talking about, like, when you put it on some government program or something, it creates that diffusion of responsibility of, well, now I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right.
So, and it gives people that ability to take an out, or to get, you know, to like, I love your example of individualism is not looking at it as looking out for myself, but looking out for what I can do, like keeping an eye open for the ways that I can affect things, and not so much of how can I get by, you know, like how can I do better for myself, but how I can make things better around me.
Yeah,
I really like that take on it.
I mean, the last video I did when I was in my pickup truck, I was talking about how the people drive change, not the government. The government always follows suit eventually with what the people want. And for some reason right now we have this idea that the government needs to be the catalyst for change. It needs to be the catalyst to take care of each other. And that's just so wrong. It's never been that way. It's always been that the people demand change first, and then some legislation will sometimes follow. But America is a weird country because we're not like a lot of European countries with more socialist economies. Like, we have this weird fusion of capitalism and socialism that it's best referred to as corporatism, with an insane amount of consumerism driven into it. And that consumerism is enabled by all these systems that I talk about all the time, like artificially low interest rates, the Federal Reserve printing money off and bailing out banks. You know, I mean, all these things enable people to be very cavalier with their money, with seemingly no repercussions, but they all end up in debt, and they all end up financially in ruin in the end. And that leaves them with no ability to take care of themselves, no ability to take care of each other. To me, this is all kind of like just one big scheme to get us hooked.
More reliance on the system,
right?
that put them in that way in the first place.
Yeah,
it goes back to, I mean, we mentioned this on my podcast, but like how the government wants this to be a big mess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, with like everything. I think the video that you were referencing when we did the podcast, I was talking about voting and how the voting disaster was intentional. But you know, the government is, I mean, it really creates all of these problems and then sets itself up as the solution to fix them. And people take it hook, line, and sinker. And if you try to point out to them, hey, the government is the one that made this problem, the solution is getting it out of the way, then, you know, then they almost demonize you as though you don't want to help, that you want to just exacerbate the problem, that you're selfish, or that you think the free market fixes everything. You know, they have all these kind of one-liners they throw at you. And it is interesting to me, like, you really have to break down what the problem is and how it materialized to them. And then they understand, and then they sometimes get on your side. It's really just about showing how the government has crept in and put itself into all these different systems and made them less and less efficient and less workable. And then you really grab their attention. So it's really just about explaining what the problem is instead of, the more snooty right-wing typical approach of, oh, shut up, liberal, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, well, that's not really a winning way to sell that message anymore. You gotta be a little smarter than that.
Yeah.
But so have you had any personal experiences in COVID or just throughout this lockdown where you've seen people really take care of each other? Do you have any personal stories related to that?
Let's see. This put me on the spot. Let me think. Outside of just like being there for people that, like, I think there were some friends who needed a little bit of money because somebody was out of a job, so we helped buy their groceries one time.
Yeah, man, that's it right there.
Well, and even just like, but just the fact that reaching out to people, I think sometimes the effort is just like showing your availability and stepping out and reaching out to friends and saying, hey, it may not be rough now, it might be rough later, but putting it out there and saying, hey, that I'm here, is something that I did. Like, so I have like an annual kayaking trip that I do with my friends that I grew up with. I consider them all my brothers, because I grew up with them literally since I was like 5 years old. And we go on a kayaking trip every year up in Missouri. We obviously couldn't this year. And so we had happy hour Zoom calls where we just kind of, got on a Zoom call and just chatted with each other and kind of made sure that we were all doing okay. And, and just kind of were there as in terms of like just being a social outlet and a way to have somebody to even vent to a little bit, in just what was going on. And it was really good. It made us, helped us all like not spiral as bad as we could have. And, it really is nice to know that, you have people like that, in your life. So,
yeah, well, to give you some credit, that's actually how you and I first started talking. You sent me a message on Twitter, I don't know when it was, back in June or something. And we just started talking then, and you were kind of a voice of encouragement for what I was doing. And this was all before the channel really took off or anything. I only had like 85 subscribers or something, and you were one of them. And you were giving me recommendations on how to, get more followers, and you were a voice of encouragement that was there, and that was good. I live alone in a city that I just moved to, and it's from New Hampshire. I'm from New Hampshire now, living in Salt Lake City, and I don't know anyone here, and I work alone all the time. So just a message like that, that can really turn someone's day around, or it could turn someone's life around. You never know when you send it. Especially in times like this where people are so lonely and they're so anxious and so angry and confused. Just being human to somebody else, it can be all the difference in the world. Yeah.
And it really is. And just hearing you say that, like, is really, like, it's nice to hear that, to make an impact, because that's what, it's validating. As much as, we are humans and we want to be validated, and that, but just hearing that and knowing that there's things that we're doing and just that naturally come is helping, push things forward, and hopefully we can continue to spread that,
Right. Yeah. So what do you do for work anyway? Has it been affected by the coronavirus much, or?
No, not outside of working from home. I do payroll, so people got to get paid still. Not everything's shut down. So I run payroll, like I do outsourced payroll.
Yep.
So like franchise businesses that own like multiple locations, like mostly restaurants. So like there's a holding group that'll have like 15 of these restaurants around, and they don't really have a large centralized HR payroll department. So they'll outsource to the company I work for. We do outsourced HR, accounting, and payroll processing for them. And so I just run payroll. Like they'll send over payrolls, and I'll make sure that I process it through and print out the checks and mail them off. And it's exciting work, man.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, at least you haven't had it affected too much through this disaster that's been going on. That's great. At least you don't own a massage parlor or something. You know, those guys are probably hurting a little bit right now.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a dip because a lot of them actually up in the Northeast and like New York and stuff. And so I saw a dip in the size of the payroll, but they're all their locations never shut down, so I never ended up having to stop. So that was definitely a blessing, and all that chaos that was going on.
So are you worried about impending lockdowns taking place? I mean, I tend to be a skeptic in general, obviously, anyone who knows me, but I felt like during the debates, Joe Biden was mostly just trying to distinguish himself from Trump on coronavirus. But when he was pressed about what he would have done up to this point, he gave an answer that was pretty similar to what Trump has already done. And in reality, he probably would have acted slower than Trump on, shutting down travel from Asia and other things like that, because he was calling it xenophobic back when Trump first started doing it. But everyone's terrified that we're going to be living under draconian lockdowns for extended periods of time under Biden. I don't necessarily think that's true. And if we do end up under those sorts of lockdowns, I don't necessarily think it'll be because of Biden, because he doesn't really have the authority to do that. I mean, he can threaten states by like saying we won't send federal funding to you if you don't follow these protocols or something like that. But I think a lot of governors are still going to tell him to pound sand. And that's what I want to see more of that, not just with coronavirus, but with other things. Like I want to see states start to step up and say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. Because the federal government has too much power, and I don't necessarily see that coming. What do you think?
I don't see it coming any more than it already did, like through Trump, like you said. I don't fear it. The thing so my perspective on this, I have kids, so I have 2 kids. So my concern, my fear, if you want to call it that, is how it's really affecting them. Mm-hmm. Because they're both young. Like my son literally turned 7 yesterday. So they're at that age that social development is like really like the big thing that is going on, like with school and all that stuff.
Right.
So that's my biggest concern is it's going to be tough on me. It's going to be stressful, like in terms of like limiting what I can do and mask wearing and whatnot. Not that wearing a mask is just like anxiety inducing to me.
Right.
But it's more about like what he's going through and what my daughter's going through. My daughter's not quite at the age where she really knows, like she's 4, so it's not quite hitting her as much as it's hitting him. But like that is what my concern is that the continued like stunting of this like social development, and it makes everything stressful. So I'm not afraid of it in terms of like you said, the draconian law of being locked down on martial law. Like that doesn't bother me. Just the fact that there's this heightened anxiety that comes with it. Like the overall just like emotional state of the country, I guess, that's exuded by we're in a national lockdown, is what really kind of puts me in a place of like, I don't want that again,
Yeah. No, I don't think the country will take it again in the way we did it in March, or April, I guess it was March and April. I think we realized that could have killed more people than it saved, actually. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about is coronavirus itself. I feel like there's either one of two extreme positions, and that is that this is the deadliest thing that's ever existed, and we need to do everything we can to eradicate it at all costs, or it's a hoax to unseat President Trump, and the whole world is just playing along because he's the last thing saving us from the New World Order. Those are kind of the two narratives. I have relatives who work in the medical field. I got a cousin who's a doctor. I've got two cousins who are nurses. I've got an aunt who's a doctor. And they all have said, no, this is it's no joke, but there are, some of my family members have said that the response has been an extreme overreaction, and that we're not dealing with the bubonic plague here. And if people were smart, we just wouldn't have to be worrying about this. That's kind of how I feel. I feel like the government is actually encouraging the hoax talk by being so ridiculous. If they weren't being so ridiculous, I feel that people would actually be taking this more seriously. It's when you have these really dumb one-size-fits-all rules that people will start to laugh at what's going on. So I'll just give a really quick example. I was I was in a truck stop getting lunch, and there were stickers on the floor where you're supposed to stand, and they were 6 feet apart laterally, but then side by side they were like 2 feet apart. It's like, okay, so the coronavirus can't go sideways. And then no, man,
it only exists in one direction, bro.
And it can only go north south. It can't go east west. But I got my meal, and I was when I was paying, I had to drop my debit card into a tray, and then the cashier picked it up out of the tray and swiped it, dropped it in the tray. And I was like, okay, that's weird as shit, but whatever. And I took it back, and they got my meal, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm supposed to have a drink with this meal too." And she said, "Let me see your receipt." So I went over like I was going to drop it in the tray, and she just pulled it right out of my hand and read it. And I was just like, okay, there is zero consistency here. And I feel like a lot of people are seeing that, and that's what's driving the lack of taking this seriously at all. Because I think people really believe it's a hoax. Like I don't think that that's just political jargon. Like I think people actually think that, and I think that is what is driving most of it, just the stupidity and the lack of consistency. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think it is, and going back to what my opinion is, I think it's a virus. I think it's something that's happening. I think it's been politicized, and I think it's been sensationalized and used as a tool, as many things are, by those in power. And I think it's people, like you said, have seen through some of that and have taken the whole extreme of, no, it's not even real. I know people who have said that. I know people who believe that. And, those are the type of people who, try to migrate over to Parler.
Yeah.
And, get in that little echo chamber and just, listen to all that stuff going on and on. But like to speak on what your example of your humorous example about the tray thing. So I go work out in the mornings, and you're required, and this is the stupidest thing, you're required to wear your mask when you walk in.
Right.
And but no other time. Like you walk in, go to the locker, take your mask off, and go work out. Like, and then you have to wear your mask when you leave. Like, you don't have to wear it any other time when you're in the building with all those other people, except when you're walking in the door.
Right. I've got a couple great comments here from the people who are watching live. Trashman Jake says coronavirus can't go diagonal. And then Matthew Von Prince says, COVID is a rook, not a bishop.
There we
So,
go.
that makes sense. Those are great comments,
Hey,
guys.
I mean, Cuomo has the 10 p.m. curfew because we all know,
Right. It goes to sleep at 10.
Yeah, it's nocturnal, so it's only out there at night. So don't go out after 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I knew that, or that I've always been skeptical of one size fits all approaches or central planning in general is actually from what I've done for work. And before I was a truck driver, I worked for a power line company out east. And when you tried to put everything on a few executives who were making decisions, and you tried to have them run everything, and they were also making all the regulations for every single job site, applying these one size fits all rules, they just fell apart in practice. It was just such a joke. And that is exactly what's happening with COVID. I mean, you just got a few bureaucrats deciding what makes the most sense and then recommending that to all the governors. And some of them are following them. And then some of the other ones are like, no, we're not going to do that. The rabid banshee says COVID only works after 10 p.m. So yeah,
it takes the night shift.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess we'll start closing it out here. But what is your podcast also going to phase away from? Or I guess you were never solely about politics anyway, right? You want to talk about a whole variety of things, but just for everyone who's listening right now, you want to tell them what your podcast is all about and where they can find it?
Yeah, it's just it's on Anchor. If you follow my Twitter, I tweet it out. It's also on my profile. You can also find it on Spotify if you search the LIBROtarian. And it's on a few other places, but it's just right now, because my circle is mostly libertarian people, it's libertarian friends and just conversations. When Reed was on my last one, we literally talked about his travels across the states and what a beautiful country we have. And so it's really just I want it to be kind of a way to bring people who have a shared political ideology into a realm of real personhood.
Right.
You may see a candidate that you enjoy or some political pundit or talking head on Twitter or something like that, and I want them to come on my podcast and talk about their favorite beer. I want it to be one of those things where it's just a conversation between people and you really get access into who they are as a genuine person outside of the realm of a niche market that you may have found them out through. So, I've always enjoyed when I've been a fan of, a band or something, going in and seeing interviews with them, talking about things that aren't their music. And that's the kind of stuff I've always found interesting, to learn who they are as a person. And that's what I want to use my podcast as a tool to help people learn other figures as people. So.
No, that's great. And that's why I've started doing more live clips while I'm driving the truck or, doing something in real life, because most of what I've done on here has been with politicians or me talking about theory. And it's good to show that you have reality, or that you're grounded in reality through a real life experience. Trashman Jake says, I tried to find the LIBROtarian's Twitter and it said it was suspended. If that's true, do you want to just tell them what happened real quick?
Oh yeah.
And how to find you now?
The LIBROtarian Twitter did get suspended. My theory is based on a automated tweet that I had going out every day at noon saying that I wanted Joe Jorgensen as my president. And after about 6 weeks, Twitter decided, that's spam, and suspended my account. So if I were to be back on Twitter, I would be under @NotTheBro. It's totally not the LIBROtarian, so you can find me at that. If I were on Twitter, you would find me there.
Right. Which you are not, obviously. So
yeah,
we don't want spammers on Twitter. So
yes, platform manipulation.
Yeah, you're done. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. We'll have to continue these shows back and forth because they need the people out there need some form of sanity to keep them together, to keep them from losing their minds. And I think you're good at that. You're very nonpartisan, but you're also practical, and we seem to agree on a lot of things, which is kind of scary. I don't think I know anyone who agrees with me as much as you do, and I am kind of an anomaly. So
we do have the one dichotomous thing that we have between each other.
We do,
and that's religion.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that in the future. I'd love to discuss that. But we will certainly have you back on again, and
absolutely.
Everyone who's watching, I'm going to be trying to do more of these live shows. I've obviously been doing them in the truck and stuff, but I'm actually going to try to do my interviews live. I'm just trying to figure out how to set up the software. Believe it or not, I'm not a tech junkie, and I do work like 50, 60 hours a week. So this stuff kind of takes the back heater, but I will be working on that. And thanks for the comments, and thanks for tuning into The Naturalist Capitalist. We'll catch you on the next stream or the next show.